rapporteur, but the special rapporteur is also, in a sense, constrained by the standards and the mission, but also the politics. We talked a lot about the politics and how he just the mandate and how that works, but how he's always walking a very fine line. Well, it doesn't need to walk that fine line, but still maybe sometimes there's also some politics there that they're involved. I also want to make a very brief connection to yesterday. Yesterday we had a whole day basically on gender and religious freedom, and Ed will use a lot of the time the word FoRB. FoRB is really one of those acronyms we use a lot in the religious freedom world. It's freedom of religion or belief, but if you use that 25,000 times a day, which we tend to do, then you start saying FoRB, so FoRB. But Ed's team has drafted really a magnificent inspired, and very, very recently inspired. For our network, also a very interesting multidisciplinary background. So not lawyer, not just lawyer, but also background is psychology, pedagogy. So I think that's a nice fit for our network. So without any further ado, Ed, please, the floor is all yours.
I just want to make this over. Anna, can you guys read? Can you guys see?
Okay. There is room.
Then everyone should be able to see it. Sorry.
All right. As a kind introduction, yeah. So first, I don't have any sort of titles before or after my name. I'm an activist. I often call myself a change agent. Getting older, but I still believe that I can participate in stuff, believing in that, and that's why I like interacting with young people, because you still are idealists and believe. So I'm excited when I get that chance to interact with them. With academics at times, and sometimes we're able to communicate, and sometimes we talk. I interact with politicians. Combination. So I like to think that the name of our organization is the Stefanus Alliance. Part means that we try to build relationships with different communities.
The people online are struggling a little bit to hear you. I'm just wondering.
So then I will speak.
Thank you.
Number one, I will speak more loudly. Thumbs up from the people online. Can you hear better now? These people. Is that okay?
I'm waiting.
Response yes?
Can you ask me to use the mic, please?
Okay, I will try to use, and by use the mic, you mean you want me to be chained to this position right here, but okay, I will do what I can to make that happen.
I might just point sometimes.
Yeah, then I will grab my notes and pull them
Yes,
over here. That's just life. This is the days of hybridity when we are both online and live. And I guess that's better than just being online as it was before. So, but we're getting thumbs up now. It's okay. Much better. Okay, great. So then, as everyone said, we are a Christian faith-based organization. But when we advocate for freedom of religion or belief, or FoRB, as they pointed out, we advocate on behalf of all people. And that includes not just religious people, but non-religious people. People who have no affiliation, they don't want to say they belong to any religious or theological group, and those who definitely say we are non-religious, atheists, agnostics, human ethical society people. So one of our strongest allies in Norway is the Human Ethical Society. So we often speak together when we're talking to the government, because we both take a principled approach. I've been invited to a number of their events to give an opening speech when they launched their annual report on persecution of humanists and atheists and agnostics, for instance. In addition, just recently I spoke at an event by the Ahmadi community, which is a sect within Islam, for those of you who are not familiar, that is not recognized by mainstream Islam, Sunni and Shia Islam as a Muslim sect, similar to what maybe Jehovah's Witnesses would be to the Christian community. But I was invited there, and I've spoken there the last several years. And so we as an organization want to be principled in how we approach freedom of religion and belief, or FoRB. So the acronym FoRB has the two parts at the end, religion or belief. And the religion part obviously covers religion. The belief is to cover all those other non-religious beliefs. So in the formation of Article 18 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in the discussion about this article on religion, the Soviet member said, well, religion is just supernatural hogwash. Why do we even have anything about this? But if we're going to, we need to have something about ubisdania, or conscience. Those aspects of our lives that aren't necessarily religious in nature, but are deeply held. And so that's why the word belief. You might see a difference if you're talking with your American counterparts. They will use the word religious liberty or religious freedom. And that has to do with their historical sort of background, where it's one in the First Amendment, religious freedom. Those who work at a top level in the United States will also recognize that that covers non-religious actors as well, but the name in itself can be a bit confusing, whereas we in Europe will use the term FoRB. So, we're good? Okay. Then, I've got that out of the way. A couple of sort of ground rules for me. Number one, I really firmly believe that curiosity is one of the greatest values you can have and you can sort of cultivate in your life. If you start losing that, again, people get older, they think they know more than they do. And so closely related to curiosity is epistemological humility. Being a little bit humble about what we know. I must say, when I was your age, I knew a lot more than I do now. I knew how to solve all the problems in the world. You just asked me and I would say, yeah, if you do this, this, and this, it would fix things. Now I'm a little less sure. And I think that's a good take to have, that we acknowledge the things we know, but at the same time recognize that I've been wrong before and maybe I can be wrong in the future. And I think that's a good starting point when we're dealing with these issues. This is not hard science, this is social science, and it is very, very challenging. Number three, and here I'm drawing on the work of the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion before Ahmed Shahid was Heiner Bielefeld. So a lot of what we'll be talking about is from his work. And he often starts by saying the world is muddy. The world is complex. And too often we want to break the world down into sort of a dichotomy of right and wrong, good and evil. And it's seldom that way. It has too much complexity to it. So when we're dealing with these issues, we have to recognize that that complexity exists. And we shouldn't try to simplify it so much that we dumb it down. And we find solutions that don't really fit the complexities. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. Okay. Then what I'd like to do is, just as an exercise to get us in our minds thinking, that epistemological humility that I talked about, I'll move this out of the way. Like a concentration video and a perception video. Some of you may have seen this video before. Many may not. Hold on one second. So you will see 6 people on the screen. 3 dressed in black, 3 dressed in white. Ask, as it says, is count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball to each other. Each team will have 1 basketball and they'll be passing to one another and moving about. So you have to focus on the white team and how many times they pass the ball. You might have seen this before. If that's the case, well, just bear with me. For those who haven't, focus. Okay, you got the task? Here we go.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
Okay, how many times? 15 or 14, but it got mixed in. Okay, anyone else? 16? 15? 15? So from 13 to 16 we've got. So you've got it in the range. But did anyone notice anything else strange that happened? What? In a gorilla. Okay, did anyone not see a person in a gorilla suit? 8. So for those who saw it, it was. But for those who didn't see it, you just didn't see it. Okay. But was there anything else that happened that you noticed that was a little bit strange, a little bit off? Yeah, we will in just a second. We will, so we'll give it to you. But anything else that was a little bit off? Wow, I'm impressed. You're the first person I've ever seen who actually notices that. It started, it's yellow now or gold. It was red when it started. Anything else? Yeah. Anything else that you noticed that was changed or different? How many black players are there right now? There were 3 to begin with, correct, and now there are only 2. Okay, let's go forward and then we'll see what it says here. Correct answer is 16.
16 tasks.
Okay, and that's fine. That wasn't the main task, actually.
Spot the gorilla.
Okay.
People who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla.
Which is about the correct number.
If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color for the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. There's a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
We can go back to, okay, and I like that exercise. I often use this with activists. Again, we believe we can change the world, but sometimes we. But sorry, guys, online. What we witness is the truth with a large T. Now, it may be part of the truth. We counted the number of balls being passed, but we missed the gorilla. Or we caught the gorilla, but we didn't see the curtain changing. Or we might have caught the curtain changing, but we didn't see the person leaving. Are you with me so far? So back to my idea of epistemological humility. We need to approach the work that we do, maybe not so much with you, who are going to be academics, then you will know everything, of course. But in my field of activism, we think we know, and we need to be a little bit more humble in how we approach things and be willing to listen to other perspectives. And just because we fully disagree with that other person doesn't mean they might not have a perspective that grabs a hold of part of the truth. They might have seen the gorilla and we might have missed it. And if we're so hung up on saying they're wrong, they're the bad guy, we miss that part of the truth that we could have gotten if we listened to them. You with me so far? Okay, good. One thing, when I'm teaching or lecturing or involved with a group, everyone will remember this, and he actually criticized me for it, but I'm going to say it anyway. I hope it doesn't offend anyone. But here in this part of the world, if you agree with something that a speaker says, people nod. In Norway, that's good. In Norway, they're a little bit more straightforward. So if they disagree, they might just cross their arms, shake their head, and they're telling me very clearly, nah, I don't agree with what you're saying. Some of you have maybe been to India before, and you see that they have a wonderful way of interacting with people, and they might do like this with their head. And it sort of means, I hear you. I know you're speaking. I don't know if I agree or disagree, but so when I'm speaking, if you give me a little bit of a hint now and again, either a nod, or you can say you don't agree, or give me a little tittle with your head, that would be great. Okay? So far, so good. Right. My work is not so theoretical, it's very practical. So I'm concerned with the most egregious forms of violations. I very rarely get involved in cases involving Western European countries or the United States or Canada. I'm more concerned with the Yazidi women in northern Iraq. We've had a project providing trauma counseling who've been trafficked by the Islamic State, sold from man to man to man. Those type of freedom of religion and belief issues I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with Buddhist women who law was put in place a few years ago that said that they can't, without permission, marry someone who's a non-Buddhist. Those sort of issues sort of compel me to do this kind of work. I think about the situation for the Uyghur population in northern China, in Xinjiang province, where Uyghur women are being sterilized. They're being raped and they're being sterilized. Those are freedom of religion and belief issues that I'm concerned with. Not so much the small sort of culture debates that go along in this part. That's not to say they're not important, and people need to be doing those. That's just not where my focus is. So when I'm talking about FoRB issues, I'm talking about the most egregious type of violations around the world. And we'll talk more about some of those as we go along. Okay. I would like to do a little bit of group work first before I get into sort of the theoretical basis for what I do, and then we'll come back to more group work afterwards. So what I would like you to do is I would like you to break into groups of 2. So if you break into groups of 4 to 5, and I want you to do the following. How many of you heard of the American political scientist John Rawls, a philosopher, political philosopher, and his idea of behind a veil of ignorance, the original state. So he posits a thought experiment where he says to people, imagine that the world that exists today no longer exists, and that tomorrow a brand new world will exist, and you have the opportunity to create that new world. The systems, the structures, the rules, the regulations, everything that will govern that new world, you can do. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of a take on that, and I want you just to focus on this area of freedom of religion or belief. Okay, and here's what I want you to do. So if we can get a group, I don't know if in or you want to just sort of observe. You're just at even level with. And then right. So this group over here, you will in the new world tomorrow be part of the majority religion. However you want to, structures, whatever. Okay, this group in the middle, you belong to one of several minority religions, maybe 2 to 3% of the population. Okay, what kind of rules and regulations? In this group here, you're part of the Yeah, sorry, and then can we break them into groups in here? So I will give you 7 minutes and 12 seconds. Start now.
So I'll create one group. They're not that many. It's just 4 of them. So
Yeah.
they know what they're doing.
I don't know. Can you, Tegan? Can you see if they've heard what the instructions are? Yeah. So let's see. So those of you online, I would like you to break into a group. We'll put you in a group now, and I'd like you to discuss what the world tomorrow will look like, where you can create the rules, the regulations, the structures regarding freedom of religion or belief. And you belong to a minority group in that religion, maybe that place. 2 to 3% of the population. Okay? So off you go.
What those views would be. Yeah. And watching the
Okay, 1 more minute. 1 more minute. So 1 more minute to online. Conversations, please. Start wrapping up your conversations online as well. And I'm going to close the room now. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and close. Thank you. But I hope this was a lively discussion, and I hope it was a frustrating. It's good, but then when you look at it from a different perspective, maybe not so good. So let's start over here with the majority region.
Trying to, I guess implicitly it was about.
So let me just make sure I repeat in case Okay, anything else? So they wanted to be utopian, but you came back to the status quo. What do you mean by that?
So, I mean, I don't. So we were, because obviously we were the majority, so we're talking about, okay, we'll have a second state, but then it be more like pluralist, rather than second. Creating space for different religious communities or just different communities in general to interact, but then that poses the problem of like, obviously with the state be operating from, a finite list and the amount of like diversity.
Hold on 1 second. Just let me repeat in case, and just let me just, are they hearing what she's saying?
No, not so much.
No, so that I repeat is a good thing. Yeah, so quick summary. So this group was talking about should be a secular state, but then how does it accommodate pluralism? Should the state play an active positive role, but then what does that do with the dynamics of things? Okay.
Yeah, that's it really, just like.
Essentially, you could exclude
Well,
some people
based on the kind of examples.
that you gave. Okay, great.
Not-
So you risk then excluding people. It's too much of an active role. Okay, great. Well, I must say, as the dominant religion, you were very sort of giving and thinking that there are dominant religions that definitely don't think that way. They think that we're the dominant religion. Ergo, the rest of culture should the rest of society should sort of take their point of departure from what we do, our norms. But you haven't done that. Okay, but I mean, that makes sense. We're in this group for a reason. So, all right. Okay, Sorry, someone want to say something about that?
Just to, as a starting point,
Hold on 1 second. Would anyone want to come up and speak, or would you rather I repeat it? You're welcome to come up. Yeah, good. Then I don't have to repeat it. Yeah, take a little bit of time.
So just to clarify, our premise was that there was no discrimination.
To start with,
To start with.
everything was perfect.
Yeah, everything was perfect.
Wonderful.
And we thought about it in 3 ways. So in terms of culture and education, policy and law. So for the first one, we just thought about having religious markers such as holidays and food and other things that would be easily exercised. So yeah, and then in terms of policy indicators, we thought about well, how it is in terms of democracy and representation in politics. So as one element, but also in terms of access to rights. So just making sure that there's access to rights. So in terms of making sure that, for example, in job applications, you can see that actually minorities also apply, so that they know, for example, that those sort of that job is being posted. So just really trying to understand to what extent they access and they're aware of their rights in terms of housing, education, and so on and so forth. And we only discuss law, but more towards in terms of affirmative action, but that's already having a premise that then there's some sort of discrimination. So we would need to have regulation, but it would not be the first element to resort to. So in terms of affirmative action, and if needed, if then there's discrimination in some other sorts of regulation, either civil, administrative, or criminal, I don't know. But so that was kind of the way we organized it.
Okay, thank you. I listed up here culture, education, law, and then how to get proper representation in a democratic system. Then you also mentioned what I think this other group talked about was the non-discrimination aspect, which is the basis of most human rights as well, sort of a basic principle. And then you talked about this affirmative action, which sort of speaks to the equality aspect of it. Okay, great. This group here, anyone want to come up and represent the group?
Right. I think we also like include some of that. For example, we were also about non-discrimination and also inclusivity. So like we would wish for society to be inclusive of all religions. And so we're a majority religion, but we have some unusual practices. So we have some kinks, and we want to make sure that these are protected as well, right? And yeah, so what we were also wishing is actually separation from state. So like that politics and religion can be two different things. But then we were thinking, okay, but what if our unusual practices can be perceived as harmful or so? Might this be a concern to other religions or so? And we didn't really get to discuss it, but we were thinking, okay, we could just like try to look at it objectively and say, well, just in severe cases of psychological and physical harm, these are not practices that would be allowed. But otherwise, it would also not be okay to say, well, this is a purity violation or something like that. This is not allowed. Like, so that we have some objective ground maybe, but we didn't really get to discuss that as well. So maybe, I don't know.
Harmful practices, because I think you hit on something that would be is it some sort of secular outside agency? So this is that it? How about the online group? Anyone want to present from your group? And I don't know how to make sure that happens. They can fix it themselves. Okay. So one of you want to present?
Yeah, I don't know if I can represent you all well enough. If not, you can commenting me. I just added to your previous discussions that in our group, we also mentioned about the cultural education, especially like Hibab is talking like how to use informative media to let like general public and other majority group of people to have the knowledge and awareness of how is the life and experiences alike and as a minority, to having them know that context, have know that knowledge, have that awareness is very helpful for this majority people to have more understanding about the minority group. And also, I think Hassan is also mentioned the conflict management strategies that we can learn from some organizations or places. Well, how to deal with violence, and I can. There's a lot about that which I can remember, but yeah, the keyword is conflict management strategies.
Okay, thank you. So the thing I picked up on here is that conflict management. Conflicts, and then finding mechanisms that can sort of ameliorate those conflicts.
Sorry, I got another message from the online group to say the right to land too. I think
right to own property.
We have the right to land, but I'm assuming it's property and physical.
Well, okay, this could take two forms. I mean, in traditional communities, indigenous communities, they don't have a concept of owning the land. They belong to the land. So I don't know if that's what's meant, or if you're thinking in community rights, where you can actually have a legal identity as a community and buy property, or maybe both of those. I don't know. But
and I think when Hiba also wants to, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Hiba.
Sorry, yeah, thank you so much, Sherry. I think that Sherry covered everything we discussed, but I'd like to add a point that I think that may be important. I think it's very important for governments to increase the fund for the non-governmental institutions that works in the fields of human, because sometimes government doesn't do enough, or sometimes if there is a certain religion for the state, sometimes the non-governmental organization can work better in that regard.
Yeah. So let me see if I can sum up. So we had this assuming there will be conflict, we need some sort of mechanism for conflict management. We need to include religious education, and not in a, I'm assuming not in a proselytizing form, but in a form to make people aware of what others believe. And then there should be state funding for NGOs, you said, but I'm assuming you mean by that either religious communities or faith-based NGOs, correct me if I'm wrong, which would then a little point of departure then maybe from the separation of religion and the state. So it could be an interesting way to see how those would work together. Okay, great. Any quick questions? Because now I'm going to go into a little hardcore lecturing for a few minutes and looking at some principles and such, now that we've sort of realized that the world is muddy and it is complex and it has challenges. But any questions before we move on to that? Okay, one of my colleagues, Mina Yildirim, was supposed to be here at the beginning and giving you an introduction to freedom of religion or belief, but I understand she couldn't come, and you've gotten little smatterings of it. So let me just, so that we're all on the same page, give you my brief introduction that I, when I'm lecturing or teaching, go through. So let's start out with FoRB. It's found in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All of you know that. Also in Article 18 of the ICCPR, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Those are the two main sort of articles. Of course, you have a declaration that came in 1981 on the elimination of all forms of discrimination based on religion. That's not a binding document, but it is a UN document. And then you have a General Comment 22, which is the Human Rights Committee's comment on Article 18. This is a little bit too much for those of you who aren't in the human rights field, but if you're interested, you can go further. So General Comment 22. And if you pick up our booklet here, which you can have, just take as many, well, not as many as you like, but if everyone's gotten, you can have more, you will find those. There are different ways of classifying the components of FoRB. I like to really boil it down to three components. And we can, if we'd had more time, we could sort of delve into the other issues, but I like to boil it down to three. And because we don't have a lot of time, I would like you to together find out what these three are. So in your head, think everyone has the right to what? 1, 2, and 3. And this is in the realm of religion or freedom or belief. Okay, everyone has the right to this, and this. Thinking about it for a second, and then raise your hand, and then we can see if we can get all three of them. Let's just. Yes, add one. Practice. Okay. Be part of practice. Exactly. Good. Yeah, there's a no wagging that almost raises your hand. That's good. Yeah. To have, the starting point is to have religion and belief. Same thing. Same. Yeah. To have it, yeah. So yeah, the starting point, yeah. Advertise, that would be under here. Yeah, good. Yeah. Both exact. So this portion also has the right to not believe, if you want. Yeah. You have the right to be protected. That would fall in sort of the encompassing the whole right. Yeah. Okay. You all. I started out by saying I come from a Christian group. Did you see that I suddenly change if I want to? Right. That this is what happens inside. So like I said, you didn't see me convert to Hinduism, nor to atheism, nor to Islam, nor back to Christianity, right? Because it's in here, right? You have this belief. Forum internal, we call it. In case you're interested. This one happens outside of you, forum external. Is that part of the internal or part of the external? So this practice is forum external. So the external. What about the change? All right, say again. Okay, she says both. How many say it's internal? 1, 2, how many, 3? How many say it's external? Same hands, 1, 2, 3, some of them. And how many say it's both? So if you were to think in terms of strong and weak ties, changing has a strong tie there. And it has the same protections that this does, which I will get into, because there are different protections for the forum internum as opposed to the forum externum. But it does have a link here, because it would have some sort of ritual for bringing people into their religion. So something does happen that's external, but it could just happen internally. And we know of many communities where people live, if they were to change from the majority to the minority religion, they have no opportunity to engage in a ritual because it would be a death warrant for them. And so they can change, but it's an internal change tested openly in the public. So theoretically that could happen. But in practice, people would want to, as they enter into a new community, to be welcomed by that community, and they have some sort of rituals to welcome them into that community. Okay. And so then what does that mean that this is different than this? In Article 18 is looked at as a non-derogable right. This portion, the internum, which means the state has no legitimate grounds to interfere or limit this. Now, there are states that try to do this. The former Soviet Union was one of them. Have any of you been to North Korea? It's not a very happy place. I've been there twice, and I wouldn't recommend it as a vacation spot. They also want to interfere with what you have on the inside of you, but it's not legitimate to do that. And likewise, there should be no coercion here. So there's no coercion to force people out of their religion. You must become like me, which is often the dominant religion, trying to force the minority religion to become like them. And there should be no force to make people stay in their religion. If someone says, I want to leave, they should be allowed to. And that doesn't mean that we can't be saddened when people leave our community. There's always going to be social pressure. Your mother, your father, your brother, your sister are going to put pressure on you to say, why are you doing this to us? Why are you leaving us? But there should be no force. There should be no laws in place that hinder that person to leave, nor force them to become. You with me so far? Okay. And we'll get back to this when we talk about some of the legitimate grounds for limiting, because there are legitimate grounds. Because at this point, when it comes to practice, there are legitimate reasons to limit freedom of religion or belief. And this is where we have started working much on the intersectionalities between FoRB and other rights. So one of the things we found when working with FoRB, and this takes up gender, also the LGBTQI community. We've seen a lot of similarities there as well, where the right to freedom of religion or belief has inherent in it the obligation to limit certain practices. And so a woman who is often in a very vulnerable situation, or an LGBTIQ person in a very vulnerable situation, can actually call upon FoRB. It doesn't have to be at odds with their rights. They can actually use it to appeal to their right to have their faith and practice it the way they want to, even if it goes against what the majority has to say. You with me? It's a little bit tricky, and maybe we'll get back into that a little bit later. Okay. EHR. You could, the way I look at human rights, how many of you have a human rights background? Just to make so I get it. And most of you don't. So just let me just take this really quickly. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, written in 1948 after the Second World War, in response to never again, we should never allow this genocide to happen again. We need to have some sort of level or common understanding of how we should treat one another. And this is what this document became. It drew upon all traditions. So the committee that was responsible for writing this drew upon Western European traditions, of course, but also Eastern European traditions, African traditions, Middle East, North African traditions, Southeast Asian. One of the most prominent members was P.C. Chang, a Confucian philosopher, Charles Malik representing the Arab League. So all representatives were there discussing these issues, these 30 articles. And among them is Article 18. But you could say this became a new language of how to speak about how we should treat one another. And it had two dialects. The first dialect is in Norwegian, it would be SP, which is, but we just make it CP, and political rights. So that's one dialect of the language. And the other dialect is economic, social, and cultural rights. And it's, those of us who work in the field will say the divide is as large as you think it is, but there is a divide. And for instance, there are two major conventions from each of these: the International Convention on Civil, or Covenant, excuse me, on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And there's you can see a geographical or a cultural divide. The United States has ratified this one, but not this one. China has ratified this one, but not this one. They've started a signature process, but they haven't fully ratified it. So the argument from West would be the right to life, the right to not be tortured, the right to not be made a slave, the right to free speech, the right to freedom of religion or belief. These are all civil and political rights. These are much more important than the right to healthcare or education or expressing yourself culturally or a number of other things. And on the other hand, from the Chinese perspective or Eastern perspective, some would say, they say, well, who cares about speaking your mind if you don't have enough food on the table? If you're going to starve to death because you haven't provided for adequate healthcare or adequate employment, what does it matter that you can say what you want? This is more important. So both sides have a point, but that's why those of us who work with freedom or work with human rights say that we need both of them. They both need to work together, sort of like a zipper. It can be zipped up, but it should also be zipped again. And then an important aspect that we can come into play here, because when we're discussing how to have models of state and religion, this positive and negativity comes into play. So often we're said that civil and political rights are positive rights, and economic, social, and cultural are negative. Not in the sense that good and bad, but in the sense of active and passive. Oh, I'm sorry, can I switch these up? Sorry. This is over here, and this is over here. Sorry, my mistake. So this is positive, this is negative. The negative rights are the ones where if the state does nothing, you get those rights. So if the state doesn't persecute you for speaking your mind, it doesn't make you a slave, it doesn't torture you, you then have that right. On the other side, the positive role, which some of you then brought into here, the state has to provide education. That's the active part of the state in ensuring that the rights are being upheld. With any questions?
I was going to ask, in the sense rephrased, but you mean not obligation to this,
yeah.
to fulfill these, and there's a negative obligation.
Not, yeah, exactly.
I've never heard it as rights as much as obligation. As much as tasking.
Yep, that's correct. Good. Okay. Then lastly, religion, and I think Jeremy Gunn talked a little bit about this, but let me just reiterate it, because religion isn't just one thing. In my part of the world, people tend to equate religion with one thing: belief, dogma, or orthodoxy, the right belief. If you believe this, you are that. You're a Christian, you're a Muslim, you're Hindu, whatever. But for many people in many parts of the world, this is less important than orthopraxy, what you do in your faith. Maintaining the rituals, doing the praying, the going to the temple or the house of worship or whatever. That's more important than actually all the nitty-gritty of what you believe. And then I'm finding more and more that probably this last aspect is the most important when it comes to conflict, and that is identification. Where people are born into a community, They belong to, but they don't really know. They haven't read their own scriptures, if they have any scriptures. They haven't engaged in thinking about what it's all about. They practice it to some extent, but not always. But they belong to this group. And when that group is threatened, that's when violence occurs. That's when people come together because my group is under threats. Okay. Then we need to, how do I get to the slide that I want to show? I need to share screen. I'm going to go there.
Yep.
I'm going to share. Okay. So I'm sorry, there's a whirlwind tool we usually for these sort of things, and I could have gone into a lot more. But let it be said that freedom of religion and belief has three aspects: the right to have, change, and practice. It's only at the right to practice that you can actually legitimately limit the practices, not at the other two. And then religion also has to do with practice and identity, not just with belief. So let's just unpack this diagram. So you started out, I gave you a task. The point of departure for society. That it should have privileges, that it should receive funding, whereas the other should not. All of you agree the non-discrimination. Rights and equality rights. And this we're seeing more and more in this part of the world. I don't deal with it as much, but in this part of the world, Western part of the world, where groups are demanding equality based on identity politics. And others are saying, well, we want freedom to express ourselves in ways that might offend. And this is where we get into what is offense, who defines what it is the person receiving hate speech and the identifying who it's being sent to, this triangular method. I don't know if you explained that to me before, if you will or not, but I think it's a very useful tool. Okay, so let's start here. Traditionally, one thinks that a model of state religion relations is on a continuum from one end to the other. You have lots of freedom or you have no freedom. Okay, but this is the work of Cole Durham and Brett Sharps from Brigham Young University, the two scholars there, and they've been working on this for years, and they've identified a loop where if you look at the left-hand side of the loop, here you have the absence of or very little freedom of religion or belief. You with me? So the left side of the loop, very little. But there are two vastly different ways of addressing state and religion. On the upper side, you have a positive identification model, a theocratic state. So in theory, at least, this is what you would have in Iran, where you have a sort of a mandate from God directly to the elite who then speak God's truth, and then that's what the law will be. Okay? On the opposite side, you have a non-identification model, which would be regimes like the former Soviet Union that would say that religion is evil, it's bad, we have to do away with all religion. It's a strong, strong form of secularism. Laïcité, what we'd have in France. So France would be moving along this scale toward this direction. And it's important to note that no state is static at one point. So in various relations, they might have laws that are on this end and then other things that are more on this end. So we can't just say that a state is one thing. It's not static, it's dynamic. Okay, so as we move towards the right, we have greater and greater of religious freedom. Stick or something, or so I don't have to stick my hand in front of it? No? Okay, I'll just have to try it, because if I go over to the other side, if I speak really loudly over here, can you hear me online still? Side of the chart?
Yes.
Okay,
Got
good.
it.
I'll speak towards the microphone and not toward you. So on this side, we have a larger extent of religious freedom, but here we have a model on the top where religion and state work together. So on the other side, we have a separation model, which another keeps hands off. So for instance, the two countries I know quite well, the United States, where I come from, theoretically at least practices this model. Practice is not always as separate as we would think it would be, but at least in theory, it says we separate religion and state. So there is no formal education of religion. Separate. We don't want education in the schools and children in various beliefs. That's up to the family. They're the ones that do that job. On the other hand, in Norway, my children went to school, they learned what it is a Jew or a human ethical person. But in theory, at least, we can always guarantee in practice, but in theory, at least, those who are teaching it, they might have their own religious convictions, but they as you know, most religions are very complicated, and you can never do justice time a unit of 1 week or a few days on one religion. Now they have this throughout their entire career from grade school up through high school, learning different aspects of it. And they also learn about human rights and how that fits in as well. So those are two separate models, but they also have. So what's unique about this model is that it allows for various ways in which one is the right way in the state and the religion. And then let me just stop. Please interrupt me if you have questions. But let me just stop at this term here, secularity. Up of the scale. And Cole and Brett Sharps, they distinguish, they use a definition of secularity, distinguishing it from secularism. And they recognize that different people have different models, but for framework in which all religious and non-religious ideologies have a level playing field. They all interact at the same level, non-discriminatory. Are you still hearing me there? Just
About 50%, but Wi-Fi as well. So
okay.
that's-
Well, I think I'm back over here. So let me just stop here. How do these terms secular, so as you used, I think the first group used, or the second group, what were you meaning when you said secular? What did you mean by that? So from your point of view, that term secular was non-interference of the state in the religious affairs. So a very sort of generic sort of way of looking at it.
I think, yeah, I think the starting point was
So more on the bottom end of the scale. Again, majority religion, but at the same time recognizing that the majority can do harm to the minority. Therefore, we need to contain that, and we might do that by separating it. Okay. Any others wanted to comment on that? Secularity versus secularism? Yeah.
But I also think that that's what the state's acting in the name of the city.
Non-religious.
Not a non-religious,
Yeah. So in a sense, then, if just to repeat for those online, your term secular was more in line with the idea of secularity, which then might be on the bottom half, as you see here, and less in line with the secularism term, which would mean an ideology in and of itself. Good. Then let me move on, because Heiner Bielefeld also says a number of things about what and how freedom of religion and belief should be addressed. And one of the things he talks about is that, number one, freedom of religion and belief is important because religion is important for many people. Around the world, many people where I live think that religion is dying out, and that a secular point of view, and that by that I mean a non-religious point of view, is winning. And that sort of is the old Peter Berger sociologist way of thinking, but that's not true. In some ways it is, but it's not. Religion is still existing. Just in our part of the world, it's becoming more a spirituality than it is a old religions kind of thing. Question or comment?
From the online, Sherry asked, in which good approach for people?
Well, I would say, from my point of view, and from the point of view of Cole, Durham, and Brent Sharps, secularity as a framework is the better way of dealing with state-religion relations. Secularism as an ideology is not. It's moving in the opposite direction. So it's creating a level playing field that's important, creating a framework where all ideologies, religious or non-religious, can meet together and compete on the same level playing field. That's important. Okay, so anyway, other reasons why FoRB is important, it's violations of FoRB are very closely related to other civil and political rights violations. So where you see FoRB violations, you will see other violations of civil and political rights. Where you see high levels of FoRB, you see high levels of democratization and civil society participation. And there are lots of different reasons behind this, but one, we can go back to the Reformation in Western Europe, when one of the first rights fought for was freedom of religion or belief. Now, unfortunately, groups would fight for their right to break out of their mother church and say, we have a right, a God-given right to believe what we want. But then when other groups wanted to break out of them, they would persecute them and say they weren't allowed to do that. So one of my professors often said that human rights have been pushed forward by hypocrisy. And when we are made aware of our own hypocrisies, then we can move human rights forward. Unfortunately, the other thing are tragedies that move us forward, but that'd be another discussion. So anyway, strong participation of civil society and democratic processes. And then there is a very strong correlation between civil society, or between freedom of religion or belief, and socioeconomic development in a country. High levels of FoRB, high levels of socioeconomic development, and even more specifically for women's socioeconomic development. So a strong case for promoting FoRB is that it correlates strongly with promoting women's rights in a society. Okay. And then common misunderstandings. FoRB is not about removing religion from the public sphere. It's about creating a level playing field. It is not about protecting religions per se. And here, if we had time, we could discuss this more. Many people want to protect religions, and this has been a debate going on in the UN for many years, the defamation of religions debate. In your discussions, I don't know if you discussed this, should there be blasphemy laws? Should we, in the name of protecting social cohesion, forbid people from saying certain things that could offend the religious feelings of others? FoRB does not protect that. It doesn't protect religious feelings, and it does not protect religions per se. It protects individuals, people. And so again, using the test that everyone would use, maybe again, if you discuss this, if you're talking to a group and you're saying bad things about them, that's one thing. If you're talking to a third group that could do them harm, that begins to come up over the threshold of hate speech and incitement. We don't have time to deal with that, but just have that in the back of your mind. FoRB is not an exclusively Western or Christian right. Again, the committee that was drafting this was comprised of various religions. And it's interesting for me because this is often linked, both FoRB and freedom of expression, freedom of speech. I hear people say it's a Western right, but the people I hear saying that are often those who are sitting in power. The ones at the top, not the ones who are feeling persecuted, not the woman who's been oppressed by her religious community and wants to leave it, or the person who wants to be politically active and wants to speak their mind publicly. They don't say that's a Western right. They said it's my right as a human being. And then lastly, the last thing we'll touch on is Heiner Bielefeld says that FoRB is a peace project, but it's a non-harmonious peace project. What he means by this is that too often the idea of FoRB is dictated by the majority religion. And the majority religion says, we have social norms in our community. Now, those norms happen to come from our tradition as the majority. Therefore, if the minorities don't practice the same things that we do, they are creating disharmony. And harmony is what we want. And so if they're punished, if something happens to them, it's their own fault. It's sort of like saying to a young woman who dresses the way she wants to, maybe has a short skirt or a deep cleavage, and gets raped and saying, well, it's your own fault. You didn't recognize the norms that we live by in our culture, and therefore you deserve it, or it was your own problem. That's what we say to the minorities. Well, because you don't wear the head covering, or you don't take off the head covering, depending on which norm it is in which society, if it gets, if someone rips your head covering off, that's your problem, because you're not part of our culture. You need to be like our culture. No. FoRB is disharmonious. It assumes there is a plurality in society. It assumes there are divergent ways of believing about the transcendent. And it assumes that we will find ways of getting along peacefully in spite of that. And so a woman should be free to put on a scarf or to not put on a scarf. And the majority shouldn't tell her how she should be living. I know that's controversial and we have a few minutes left. So let me stop there and see if there are any comments or questions to that, because I know that can stir up a little bit of debate. Yes.
I have a question, but it's radical one.
Yep.
Based on the secularization. Something that even if you don't have as an identity, it's something that on you, that you are a Jew as identity. You're still a group, so how come it's a full nationalities?
Well, here I think we're talking again. Our assumption is religion has to do with belief. There are many Jews who they don't believe in God. They're atheist Jews, but because their heritage, their identity, back to religion as an identity, and those on the outside who perceive Jews as the conspirators who are running the government and they're destroying the public or the social order. They say, Jews, you don't believe in God, that's fine, but you are a Jew. Therefore, you're a threat to us. So Benedict Anderson, I think, discusses this idea of what is a nation, that is imagined community. It is creating, it's when people create a golden age in their past, which never really existed, but they extract out bits that give a common heritage to one group. Often it's religious and ethnic or linguistic, those three identity markers, and they often go hand in hand. And they would say, then that's us, and you create a greater us by creating an enemy them. And this is where Jews have come in, and religion is often used as an identity marker for those cases. So the Rohingya in Myanmar are a them. They're threats to the existence of Buddhist, pure Buddhist. The Mabata movement, which means literally for the preservation of race and religion, attacks Muslims in Myanmar. To a lesser extent Christians, but to a great extent Muslims. The same in the Hindutva ideology in India, which attacks Muslims and Christians because they're not Hindus. And Hinduism is then the identity marker for what it means to be an Indian. Yeah.
Just kind of as a response, something that was very interesting. But I think mostly Jewish people are seen culturally or inherited it or still practicing. I find specifically it's been interesting because how also a lot of these legal things came out of the Jewish people as a different race or different ethnicity. So it's not context and all sorts of things. It's just something quite interesting for me. And obviously race can be this moving thing. See as a South African, certain people in Europe as white or something like that. And then within Europe, they're seen.
Identity is a very fluid thing, and it has an overlapping context to it. So religion, ethnicity, race get mixed up together. Yes.
How we treat like race, like as a concept, so like as if they're innate to the religion. The belief anymore. This is just like violence and all of these characteristics associated, particularly in Europe.
So after 9/11, the first person that we know of killed in the United States was a Sikh. But in the eyes of a white American, had a turban on, ergo, he's a Muslim. So again, we conflate things, we put them together, we mix them up. So a friend of mine, Zia Merrill, professor or PhD from Cambridge, now works for the Defense Department in the UK. And when he converted to Christianity as a teenage boy, his father called him in and said, Zia, how can you be a traitor to, he didn't say our religion, to our country, Turkey? The rhetoric, and I think you heard Jeremy Gunn saying it, the rhetoric in Russia now is Russian equals Orthodox Christianity. And not just Orthodox Christianity, but Russian Orthodox Christianity, and the Ukrainian form, which broke out of it, and he's instrumentalizing the Pope. They're in an unholy marriage, I would say, together, where they're using religion to legitimize the violence that's being perpetrated against the people they're calling the enemy now, because they've broken away from the tradition and traditional values that we have. So it's a very scary thing when you start having this identity markers, us and them, and religion, ethnicity, race, languages all wrapped up. And now I've gone over my time, so I'm welcome to chat with this more later, but thank you very much. You might want to.
Okay. Just this last bit of the debate is a nice pointer to the last session today. Dave Keen on caste-based discrimination, racist discrimination. He will speak about ICER, so the International Convention on Elimination of all forms of racist discrimination. And yeah, I think we can really also continue this last part of the discussion with him. Now it's break time, coffee time, and after the break it's me, I'm afraid. So yeah, so see you in half an hour.
Please take the booklets if you like.